So welcome everybody to our Center for Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety webinar titled, Does California's First Speed Camera Installation in San Francisco Reduce Speeding? A Quasi-Experimental Analysis, presented by Dr. Matthew Raifman and Dr. Sujin Lee. My name is Nick Ferenczak. I'm the director of the Center for Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety and a professor in the Civil Engineering Department at the University of New Mexico. Our center is a US DOT supported 5-year university transportation center. We're led out of the University of New Mexico here, and we've also got San Diego State, University of California, Berkeley, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee on the team. So there's a lot of great research going on all over the center. Feel free to check out our website, pedbikesafety.org, to dig into that. We've also got our webinar series, as you know, try to have one per month. We've got a monthly newsletter as well. If you go to our website, go to the bottom, you can put your email address in to subscribe. And then you can also follow us on LinkedIn, where we're always posting new papers, reports, webinars as they come out. So to jump into today's presentation, if you have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, please do share. There should be a Q&A box at the bottom ribbon of your Zoom screen. So please put any questions or comments in there. And our program manager, Ben Garland, will be moderating the Q&A session at the end. So we've got two presenters today. Dr. Matthew Raifman is the research lead for policy and autonomous vehicles at UC Berkeley SafeTREC. In that capacity, he leads work on the road safety impacts of emerging vehicle technologies and the effectiveness of transport policies and interventions. Previously, he led Ford Motor Company's AV pilot partnerships on the East Coast, advised senior officials at the World Bank and the state of Maryland, and researched sustainable mobility at the World Resource Institute. He holds a PhD in environmental health from Boston University and a master's in public policy from Harvard. We've also got Dr. Sujin Lee, who is a postdoctoral researcher at UC Berkeley SafeTREC. Her research interests include traffic safety, travel behavior, and their association with the built environment. She is currently involved in projects on context-sensitive speed limit setting, telematics-based driving behavior analysis, and the evaluation of speed camera effectiveness in San Francisco. With a background in urban planning and computer science, she earned her PhD and MS in transportation engineering from the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. So Matt and Sujin, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Great. Well, thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to present, and we look forward to the questions at the end. We'll try to answer some that pop up in the chat as well as we go. So today, Suja and I are representing a broader research group here, including Phoebe and Julia, that looked at the California implementation so far for their speed camera, their automated speed enforcement program focused on cameras as the method. It's quasi-experimental. We'll get into what that means and why it's significant in a bit. Just to kick it off, vehicle speed matters a lot for road safety. I think most of us in the virtual room will already know this, but it has been a pernicious and long-standing challenge for the United States. About 10,000 people, more than 10,000 people, have died every single year for the past 5 years, and most likely 2025 will also fit into that as well. It is the #1 contributing factor to fatal crashes in the city of San Francisco, which we'll focus on today. And while there have been some movements back and forth in general for the past 15 years, speed has been a contributing factor in a quarter to a third of fatal crashes in the United States. So it's been a problem for a while. It continues to be a problem, and it's not getting much better. Why speed matters? Why is it such a problem? Well, there are 3 aspects that I'll just mention today, but we could go into greater detail and think about other factors as well. The first one is stopping distance. And the amount of space, the distance needed for a vehicle to stop, is affected by 2 different factors when it comes to speed. One is the reaction time. So if you're going faster, your reaction time needs to be even quicker to stop in the same distance. So because your reaction time is constrained, you end up with a reaction distance that grows with speed. The other thing is braking and braking distance on dry and road wet roads. So we can see that this is a visualization put together by Queensland government in Australia, but as the speed increases, the distance needed to stop a vehicle increases dramatically. And that is a huge reason for why speed affects road safety and crash instances. The other thing is something that again, everyone in the room I think is probably well familiar with at this point is the foundational research looking at pedestrian injury risk and the relationship with speed and the likelihood of surviving a crash as a pedestrian if you're hit by a vehicle going different speeds. And we can see that as speed increases, the risk or the likelihood of surviving a crash goes down considerably. And then one thing that is also important and less talked about, I think, is the effectiveness of roadway countermeasures, safety countermeasures, and their effectiveness goes down with speed. And the reason why is because of the kinetic relationship between a vehicle mass and speed and the kinetic energy that's transferred in a crash. And it's exponential when it comes to speed and velocity in that case. So put differently, a bollard that's rated for a 5,000-pound vehicle at 30 miles an hour is going to have to absorb twice as much energy if that vehicle goes from 30 miles an hour to 45 miles an hour. And the design specs of these bollards are not often designed to accommodate that large increase in speed. So speed has a big impact on the effectiveness of the countermeasures in our roadway, which of course are designed to protect pedestrians and cyclists and other road users. And then something I don't talk about here just based on the focus of the subject and because we're looking at urban, but it's important also to recognize that the effectiveness of in-vehicle protection also goes down with speed. And we're talking about airbags, safety belts, and things like that. So speed has an impact on the likelihood of a crash, the severity of a crash, and other factors that impact road safety. So speed cameras can be a really effective solution at addressing these speed challenges. And they're not necessarily a new technology. They've been in place for more than a decade. And there have been quite a few studies out there that have looked at the effectiveness of speed cameras on safety, either through the crash mechanism, like the likelihood of a crash, or the severity of the outcomes of the crash. And this visualization you see on the right is from a paper that looked at, I think, 63 different studies. It's a meta-analysis of 63 studies and the effectiveness of speed cameras. But we can see some consistency across these studies. I mean, you're looking at generally somewhere between 10 and 50% reduction in the likelihood of crashes at camera sites and nearby streets near cameras. There have been a couple studies that have found kind of that range. This meta-analysis of 63 studies, I think it's the same one, looked at, found a 20% reduction in crashes. And then more recently, there have been efforts to move from measuring the effectiveness of speed cameras just at the location of the crash before and after the implementation of cameras, and to move beyond that methodology and to look at quasi-experimental studies. And this is where our study fits in. But one of the best examples of a quasi-experimental study is this recent study that came out in PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, that came out last year. And it's a quasi-experimental study of the efficacy of the New York City speed camera program. And that's the longest standing program in the United States so far. And it found a 30% reduction in injuries over the first 7 months of each camera's implementation. So it's an interesting study because it's actually looking at 10 years of data, but because the cameras were phased in over that 10-year period, it's possible to look at the reductions over the initial stage of each camera. So there's been a reasonable amount of research out there that have looked at the efficacy of cameras. But in the United States, there's kind of an interesting dynamic happening from the policy perspective. So speed cameras are actually legalized in law in 22 states, but they're illegalized, if you will. There's laws that specify that it's illegal to install a camera in 9 states. So California became in 2023 one of the more recent states to authorize speed camera pilots. Over the entire United States, there are over 300 individual communities that have speed cameras in place. And you might note there in Texas. I thought this was actually an error in the visualization for a second until I looked into it, but you can see that one lone dot there in Texas. And what happened there was the state of Texas made speed cameras illegal in 2019. But there was one, I think it's Leon Valley, a small community that already had them in place. And in 2019, right before the legislation went into effect, making them illegal, they passed a 20-year extension. And that allowed them to leverage the grandfathering clause of that new legislation. So I think that's an example of just how valuable some communities find speed cameras, that they're willing to extend a contract for 20 years into the future just to maintain the cameras when their state makes them illegal. So California in 2023 legalized or passed a law making it possible to test and pilot speed cameras in the state. It's an interesting law in the sense that it's very explicit in what types of pilots are allowed and what the constraints are on the number of cameras and the way the cameras can even be utilized. So the legislation, this particular bill authorized 6 different California cities to pilot speed cameras. Los Angeles, San Jose, Oakland, Glendale, Long Beach, and the city and county of San Francisco, which is our study. San Francisco became the first city to look at speed cameras, to implement them in 2025. What's interesting about this, as I mentioned, is that there is explicit designations of how many cameras, how many locations are authorized under the bill based on the population of the city. So if you think of San Francisco, I think it's around 850,000 people. It's right above the threshold here for 800,000 in B in the top right, and therefore there are allowed 33 camera systems. Los Angeles will be 125 camera systems. Another thing is it specifies the type of applications for the speed cameras. They have to be either on a high incident network roadway, a safety corridor, either used for school zones or used for sideshows or these events where there are motor vehicle contests on the road. There's also specifications for what the fines can be and criteria for reducing fines for lower income individuals. So it's very specific in its legislation. San Francisco's speed camera program went into effect, as I mentioned. It's the first camera program in the state to go into effect, and it went into effect in 2025. There are 56 cameras located at 33 locations. Why? Why is there that difference? Well, the reason why is because the legislation specifies there can be up to 33 systems installed, but those cameras have to record the rear license plate of the vehicle. And this is due, I don't want to opine on this, but this is likely due to privacy concerns and also just consistency across the space. If you have a bidirectional roadway on one of these road segments, that means you need 2 cameras. You need a camera facing both directions because of the requirement that it only record the rear of the vehicle. So you end up with, in many of those locations, bidirectionally, you have 2 cameras, one for both directions. So the speed camera timeline here is in March and April, the cameras were electrified, they were turned on, connected to PG&E, and installed and flipped on. Once the cameras go on, they immediately started issuing warnings. So the warning period was required to be at least 60 days, but the actual warning period, meaning the period where the camera locations were issuing warnings, might be 60 days or it might be 90 days or more, based on when the camera was switched on. So you have a staggered kind of warning rollout in the program. And then on August 5th, for all the cameras, that's when they switched on and started issuing citations. There is also one caveat here, which is if the registered vehicle has a first infraction, the first citation, that is always a warning. So it is possible for warnings to be issued after August 5th, but for repeat offenders or those who have already received citations, that is issued as a citation. So it's a little caveat here, but you have a kind of warning period that flows into the citation period. Some high-level statistics have been made available by SFMTA. Over the first year of the warning and citation period from March to March of 2025 to 2026, there have been about 160 paid citations of over 160,000 over 550,000 warnings issued. So program notices for this program are approaching now probably around 1 million citations and warnings issued as of this point in the calendar year. So it's a pretty large program, but not as large as a place like New York State or New York City. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sujin, who's going to take over the results portion.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Matt. So, given that all the background of the San Francisco speed camera program, we wanted to evaluate whether the speed camera program in San Francisco is actually working. So, we focus on three research questions. The first is the speed camera program reducing speed outcomes overall. And second, does the effect differ between the warning phase and citation phase? Because that tells us something about what's driving the behavioral change. And third, does it work differently depending on positive speed limit? Because San Francisco speed camera program has three different speed limit zones, the 20, 25, and 30 mile per hour. So we want to check, is there any heterogeneity of that effectiveness depending on that speed limit zones. So. And to answer those questions, we'll look at three different speed outcomes. The first is share of vehicles exceeding posted speed limit. So for example, in a 30 mile per hour zone, any vehicle going over 30 mile per hour counts. So I want to flag on one thing here. So this is not the same as the camera's enforcement threshold, which is in San Francisco triggers a citation at 10 mile per hour over the limit, but our measure is more sensitive, so it captures anyone exceeding the limit even slightly. And the second is mean speed, the average speed of all vehicles passing through a segment. It captures the overall distribution, not just the most extreme speeders. And the third one is interquartile range of speed. So this measures the speed variability among vehicles. So when this metric goes down, then vehicles are traveling at more similar speed. And that's actually important for traffic safety because speed differences between vehicles are related to the potential vehicle conflict followed by the actual crashes. So with that, our speed data came from INRIX telematics data. The telematics is essentially the GPS-based movement data collected from vehicles or phones, fleet trackers, and connected vehicles. So we got a record of each road segment each vehicle passed through and when it entered and exited each segment. So from those timestamp and the segment length, we can calculate space mean speed across entire segments in San Francisco. So we used the data from April 2024 through March 2026. It covers 61 weeks of pre-period and 9 weeks of official warning and 35 weeks of citation enforcement period. So here's the core methodological challenge. The simplest thing we could do is just to compare speeds before and after camera installation at those camera locations. But the problem is the real life is quite messy. The speed might go down because of seasonal changes, another policy interventions, and San Francisco Marathon recently. So any number of things unrelated to the cameras. So if we only look at before and after at camera locations, we cannot tell whether the cameras affected speed changes or something else did. So what we really want to do is a parallel universe, the San Francisco without speed cameras, so we can compare that what happened with camera to what would have happened without them. So we cannot do that, but we can do the next best thing, find the locations that are very similar to camera sites in every measurable way and use those as control group. So that's the idea of quasi-experimental approach. And it has two steps. The first thing is to construct a credible control group, and second is to estimate the treatment effect by comparing camera location to the constructed control group. So in this research, we built control group two different ways. The first approach is Hungarian matching method. So think of it as matchmaking algorithm for the row segment. So for each camera location, we find three control segments based on similarity of road context, including crash histories, school density, intersection density, land use, and road type within the same speed limit stratum. So we try to duplicate the camera sighting procedure. So importantly, we only draw from the segments at least half a mile away from any camera to avoid picking up segments that might be indirectly affected. And we didn't allow recycling the same control segment across multiple camera sites. And the second approach is synthetic control method. So instead of looking for the similar real road segment, we create a synthetic control for each treated segment by combining multiple untreated road segments from the same speed limit stratum. So we assign weights so that their combined pre-period speed trend closely match the camera location's speed trend. So both approaches are asking the same question: what would have happened at camera locations if there were no cameras, but just from the different angles? So if both approaches give us the similar result or the same result, then we can confirm the robustness of speed camera effectiveness evaluated in this study. So once we have our control group, then we use the method called difference in differences. So this idea is quite simple. So we look at how speeds change at the camera location over time. And we also look at how speed changed at control group over the same time period. So the difference between those two changes is the estimated effect of speed cameras. So this approach is powerful because it considers anything that affect both group equally: seasonal pattern, citywide policy changes, and overall traffic trends. So by differencing them out, then we are left with just the camera effect. So in our study, we split this after part into two phases: warning phase and citation phase. So instead of one after period, we get separate estimates for each phase, and it let us see how the effect evolves depending over the times. And definitive gives us one average number for each phase. The event study takes it further. It shows us how the effect evolves, changes over time. So in this analysis, we use weekly patterns, so week by week changes can be observed. So think of it as an extended version of definitive. So instead of just before versus after, we estimate the effect at every single week relative to the program start. And here's the key design choice we made. Instead of using official warning start date as a reference point for all cameras, we use each camera's own activation date. That's because cameras were activated at different times. So some as early as March, other closer to June. So if we use single calendar date, then early activated camera look like they had an effect before the official warning period. So by using each site's camera activation week, we get the cleaner picture of when behavior actually started their changes. I'll keep this brief because not everyone here is focused on the technical details. Both definitive and event study use the same underlying model, two-way fixed effect. So it includes two layers of controls: segment fixed effect, which observe time invariant characteristics like the road's characteristics like geometry and surrounding environment. And there's another layer is year and week of year fixed effect, which soak up the common seasonal trend affecting all entire road in San Francisco. So together, these let us isolate camera effect from everything else moving at the same time. So this formula is about definitive two-way fixed effect formula. So we estimate two key constraints, the beta W in green for the warning phase and beta C for the citation phase, and they denote the average treatment effect on treated segments during warning and citation phase respectively. And the event study swapped those two phase indicator for week by week indicators, giving us full curve instead of two numbers. And the standard error are clustered at site level, and for speed limit analysis, we add interaction term to let the effect vary by posted speed limit. So let's go to the detail of result. So this figure shows the row weekly speed trend for camera location and their synthetic controls over full study period. The before this warning period, the two lines track each other very closely. So it tells us that our control group is capturing the same underlying trend as the camera side. And then starting around warning period, you can see some divergence begin. The camera locations start declining faster than the control group. And by citation period, this gap is established and it holds. So it is interesting that both lines show slightly downward trend, but the treated location fall further and faster, and that divergence is measured as the camera effect. Oh, this is the result in numbers. And this is the definitive result with the coefficient of warning and citation effect. So looking at the share of vehicle exceeding speed limit, the cameras reduce speeding by about 2.2 percentage points during warning phase. So that's roughly 9% reduction compared to the baseline, the pre-period level. During the citation phase, there was extra 1.8 percentage point reduction. So the total is 16% decrease in speeding compared to pre-period. So it is interesting to see meaningful reduction even during warning phase before any fines were issued. And this indicates that camera enforcement can influence drivers' behavior even before penalties begin. Mean speed and speed variability also decline, but pattern is slightly different from the exceeding rate. So for the exceeding rate, the warning phase has slightly larger effectiveness, but for this mean speed and the speed variability, the citation phase produced larger additional reduction than the warning phase. And compared to pre-period, the mean speed fell by about 1 percentage during the warning phase and reached a total reduction of 3% during the citation phase. The speed variability followed a similar pattern, declining by 2% during the warning phase and reaching 7% during the citation phase. So these changes are important because lower mean speed reduces crash severity, while lower speed variability means vehicles are traveling at more similar speed, reducing speed differences and potential conflicts between vehicles. So together, these suggest meaningful safety improvements. Yeah, so here's one of our key credibility checks. So far, I've mainly shown the result from synthetic control method, but we ran the analysis in two ways, the Hungarian matching method and synthetic control method. And you can see the result in this table. The numbers aren't identical, but the pattern is very consistent. Both methods show significant reduction in exceeding rate during both phases, and also show the mean speed and speed variability declining more in citation phase. And the R-squared values are between 0.77 and 0.95, suggesting the model fit the data well. The fact that two fundamentally different approaches to building control group produce similar results increase our confidence that findings are robust and not driven by how control groups was constructed. The effects also differ by speed limit zone. In 30 mile per hour zone, the share of speeding vehicles decreased by about 29% compared with 40% in 25 mile per hour zone. In 20 mile per hour zones, the estimated reduction was about 4% and was not statistically significant. One possible explanation about this is that many 20 mile per hour zones already have features that help control speeds, such as schools, frequent intersections, and speed bumps, and higher pedestrian activities. So in these settings, the road involvement may already encourage lower speed, leaving less room for additional improvement for the camera enforcement. So this finding suggests that effectiveness of speed camera depends on the surrounding road environment and may vary across different speed limit zones. The event study shows how the effect changes over time relative to each camera's activation week. So before activation, so the x-axis means the relative week to the camera activation. So the negative number is before activation. So this before activation, the estimated effects remain close to zero, providing evidence that the treated and control location followed a similar pre-intervention trend. And the share of vehicle speeding decreased after camera activation, but there is some time lag. So this time lag is consistent with the time it takes for the warning letter to be delivered after a violation is detected. So since most cameras were activated less than 11 weeks before the official warning period began, the driver would not have received their warning letter immediately after activation, so which helps explain why these effects appear about 8 or 9 weeks later. And this effect persists after activation. So even 40 to 50 weeks after activation is supposed to do the citation period, but the speeding remains significantly below the baseline level. So this suggests that drivers do not gradually return to the previous behavior after initial implementation, and that the behavioral change is sustained over time, even until now. And this is the bonus analysis. I wanted to briefly share the additional piece of evidence related to public awareness. So we examined Google search trend for the terms such as San Francisco speed cameras, SF speed camera, SF, that kind of keywords alongside our treated and control speeding profile. So we observed the two waves of search activity. The first wave happened, it happened around 10 weeks. Yeah, so that first week seems to correspond to SFMTA announcement about the program in January 2025. And there might be lots of news articles related to that at the time. And the second wave aligned with the official warning period around the time when drivers would have started receiving their warning letters. So this second wave of public attention coincides with the widening gap between treated and control location in this speeding rate. So while we cannot determine whether increased searches cause the behavior change or establish the direction of the relationship, but the trend suggests that the public awareness of the program may have contributed to OLE compliance beyond the effect of fine alone. So with that, yeah, that's all for the result from my side. Then I'll hand it over Matt for the conclusion.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sujin. So, yeah, a couple kind of high level points. One is, that 16% reduction compared to baseline, that estimate is both directionally consistent with the previous literature and SFMTA's findings. And it's also even with regard to the previous literature, pretty consistent with the range of findings that you see in the broader literature, that 10 to 50% reduction in speeding behavior. And this is even with the introduction of these more robust controls made possible with the INRIX data, the telematics data. The other thing that we found interesting was the effectiveness varies by speed. So that Sujin talked about that with the different speed limits. And that's, I think, we did not find evidence of other research that had found a similar finding or had looked into it in the same way. So that's maybe a novel contribution of the work. The impact is highest during that warning period, and that's something Sujin was just hitting on, probably due to the media coverage. Another thing, just an additional caveat on kind of the previous slide there, it's also a function of which newspapers published the articles and the circulation of those various newspapers and blogs. So there were a couple very high-profile news papers, websites that published information about the speed camera program just preceding each phase. And so it is quite possible that that information fed into the public knowledge and affected behavior, both at the speed camera locations and at the control locations. And I think that's maybe something that is interesting and a hypothesis we have after doing the work, but really is not something we're able to conclude decisively with this research. And that is the idea that these programs, because of that expansive, that soapbox that happens, the effect of the media coverage and the information sharing around the cameras, might actually have implications for speeding activity beyond just the camera locations. And you can see that on the diff and diff chart that Sujin presented, where you see both the controls and the treatment sites both dropping over the same period. So maybe that will last, maybe that won't last, that effect. We're not really sure, but it does appear to have, at least in the initial stage, an impact on even the non-camera locations or road segments throughout the city. As you can see on the chart on the right, the idea here is the bubble size is a reflection of how much of an impact the camera had on speeding behavior. So smaller bubbles means less impact on speeding activity. Bigger bubble means a bigger impact or a bigger decrease in speeding activity. And what you can see is a variation, right, a variance in the size of the bubble. And that is to say that the effect of the cameras does vary by camera location. And that's an important takeaway from this work, because it feeds into the fact that maybe some of these locations, which received a smaller effect, I'm thinking of some of these like purple ones here that are pretty small, the cameras were effective. They did reduce in a statistically significant way speeding activity, but they may not have achieved the goals of the policymaker. And in doing so, it may be necessary to supplement speed cameras with other forms of traffic calming or other enforcement to bring some of these sites in line with the behavior that you see in others. So to even out that consistency of the impact, because these are all high impact or high incident network road segments that we care about, because we know there are a lot of segment incidents at these locations, it might be important to supplement speed cameras and implement other forms of traffic calming or improvements. And then the final thing is that in this early stage, after just 1 year, we're only able to really analyze the effect on activity patterns like speed and speeding activity. I think the next phase of this work, or the future phase after some time has passed, would be to study the impact on injuries and fatalities and more severe crashes. So that's future work. It's not work that's being done right now. But this work is the first of probably a broader set of work that will happen in California that looks at the effect of all of those speed cameras, all 6 of them, all 7 when you include Malibu, which was added. I think it was Malibu. So there's a broader work that needs to be done in California to look at the effectiveness of the entire speed camera pilot. But our hope is that these results and those results can feed into the policymaker decision making around whether or not the speed camera program should be continued or expanded in the state of California, given the efficacy that we're seeing here. So with that, we'll finish up. We'll answer. We have 4 open questions, and then I'm sure other ones will pop up. But we wanted to recognize that this research was supported by the University of California Institute of Transportation Studies through the State of California Road Repair and Accountability Act, Senate Bill 1, SB 1. And then we also wanted to thank the San Francisco MTA, INRIX, and Metro Lab for providing data and also providing a lot of insights and support of the study that helped us design the methodology and implement it. So thank you very much. And then we have 5 open questions now. So I tried to answer a couple of those there, but Ben, do you want us to just start kind of going through the questions, or did you want to curate them in some way?
Since there's only 5 of them, you guys can just tackle that if you want. It might be a little more efficient.
Okay, perfect. 6. We're going up. So one thing, Sujin, I didn't know the answer to this one. I thought you might be able to chime in on this. So one of the questions here. Yeah, go ahead. Can you see
I
them
can
too?
answer Joseph's question.
Great.
It's about the how to set the speed limit in San Francisco and whether there's any changes in speed limit during our study period. So to my knowledge, there's no speed limit changes during our study period, and so that shouldn't affect our result. And how speed limits are set more broadly in San Francisco is a bit outside of the study scope of what we examine, but that's really a great question. So maybe SFMTA would be much better place to speak to that.
Okay, so an anonymous attendee asked, how do you address concerns over surveillance? And second question of that series was, does the introduction of speed cameras impact the desire for other policies or designs that might reduce speeds and improve the area for other modes of transportation like policies? So on the surveillance point, it's a bit outside the scope of our work, but I do think it's worth acknowledging that there are lingering questions around privacy, equity, surveillance, things like that around speed cameras. With the surveillance piece, the provisions in the bill are fairly strict in the type of data that can be collected and how it can be used. No video footage, as an example, is collected. That's pretty unique, actually, for speed cameras. Most speed camera programs use video to calculate if this vehicle was speeding or not. In the case of the California bill, it has to be only a photo. So there's some provisions there, but it's a bigger question, I think, probably for the policymakers. But the second question here, the introduction of speed cameras impact the desire for other policies. So one interesting thing here is proceeds that are generated by the program must be used by the law to fund the program. But because there's likely to be and is excess revenue coming into the cities, that actually is stipulated in the bill that money needs to be used for traffic calming and other safety improvements in the road infrastructure. So it's earmarked for these other modes of transportation to improve the safety of the roads. And a lot of those earmarks are actually designed around vulnerable road users. So there is actually specification in the bill that requires supplemental revenue that's generated to be invested in improving safety on the roadways. Okay, sorry, the questions are coming in here. So one question here is, was speeding defined as 1 mile an hour over the posted speed limit, or is there a margin of error? In this study, we use the threshold, well, for the first outcome that we presented, which is just to look at was the vehicle speeding or not. We use a 1 mile an hour threshold. So our definition of speeding is, did the speed of the vehicle exceed the speed of the roadway, the speed limit? That is not the threshold that's used for citations. Citations require more than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. But we did also look at mean speed, median speed, interquartile range, 85th percentile actually, and a couple other outcomes that Sujin talked about. So it's not just about, is it over or under the speed limit? Were the citations issued per license plate readers? In which case, how could the actual driver be responsible identified? Great question. So the way that the citation systems work is there's a procurement, obviously, for each city. Each city in California is actually procuring a different, well, they're not all different, but there are different providers being utilized. They are all linking the license plate number to the vehicle registered. As a result, it is not about the driver, it's about who registered the vehicle. So the citation goes to the home address and the person who registered the vehicle, not to the individual driver. And that's why these programs do not result in like points on insurance, for example, because it's not possible to identify who is actually driving the vehicle. Sujin, do you want to take this question at the bottom there? Because I think that pertains to some future work you want to do.
Oh, future work.
It's the question is there any plan to study
Oh.
effects on nearby streets? I have heard of fears that people who may speed may simply take nearby routes, but I'm not sure if there's evidence of this.
So another topic related to this speed camera program is that the enforcement avoidance behavior. So people might take different routes to avoid the speed camera and some possible citation. So that might affect. So if that happen and majority drivers do that kind of behavior, then maybe the streets nearby, the cameras are suffered by that increased traffic. But we didn't find any evidence yet. We didn't start yet. But yeah, we definitely interested in that kind of topic.
Yeah, and it's the telematics data that makes that kind of work possible, because
Yes.
you're essentially getting a trajectory for each vehicle in the sample. So you're able to see, oh, that vehicle was on this route and then the speed camera's right here, right? And so they went on this street and went around it, or maybe they slowed down just for the speed camera and then they accelerated afterwards. So you're able to study that with the telematics data in a unique way that makes it really rich. But it's a lot of work. So we did this paper first to look at this first, but I think there's other work that can be done.
But that's definitely interesting topics.
Someone asked, was there a significant impact on the court system to process the citations? It's not something that I think we're in a good position to answer. I do know that streamlining and learning from the program has been a big part. And to their credit, the city of San Francisco has borne most of the burden of that work because they're the first city to implement the speed cameras in California with this legislation. So they've worked through a lot of those identification processes, linking up with the Department of Motor Vehicles to make sure the license plate is tracked and doesn't lost. Any issues around like people blacking out the license plate or trying to get around the citation or speeding but not getting cited. So working through all those details has been something that this particular implementation's had to work through at the beginning. Citywide injuries and speeding after activation. Great question. We do not have the current data for 2026 yet. And 2025 is still in processing for the state of California. So we aren't able to deep dive into if there are reductions in injuries yet, but that's something that we definitely want to look into in the future to see if the reductions in speeding that we're observing in the telematics data are also accompanied by reductions in either severe injury or fatal crashes at the camera locations.
Matt, I had a question for you. Since you guys are in California, I've noticed probably in about the last year or so, because we have speed cameras here in Albuquerque, if you plan a route in Google Maps or
Mm.
Apple Maps, they now alert you that there's a speed camera ahead. Have you guys, are there any discussions about that in California to say, hey, maybe these map software shouldn't be telling people that there's a speed camera ahead?
Great question. I can confirm that Waze does have the camera sites and it also has red light cameras in the system. So yes, same type of situation here. Um, I haven't heard a lot of conversation as to whether or not that's desired or not among city officials or policymakers. I think in general, the goal is reducing speeding on the segments. So if it's happening because people are aware of the risk there, and they see the indication on their app, that's fine. If it's because they see the really heavy signage that accompanies these installations, something we didn't talk about, but the second that the cameras went up, there was signage put in place. So there's a lot of signaling to the driver that there's a risk of getting cited here and they should slow down. So if they're slowing down because of that, my guess is people don't necessarily care why, because these are areas that are high incident areas for whatever reason. So it's a great question, and it is something I've noticed in ways. Let's see. Is it great? Susan, do you see anything there? Do you want to pick
Oh,
up?
I can answer any heterogeneity on the surrounding land use and number of lanes, that kind of thing. Did you see that question? So the
Yeah.
question
Yeah, go ahead.
is, did you do any analysis on roadway context in which speed was reduced less? So for in this study, we only confirmed the heterogeneity on the speed posted speed limit, not the land use and number of lanes. But that's really interesting question, and we plan that might be the future work. So I think the posted speed limit is quite related to the land use and traffic volumes and that kind of thing. So that kind of factors are correlated with each other. But yeah. So in this study, the higher posted speed limit has the more reduction in the speeding and mean speed, that thing. But we will set the study topic related to this to see any other more factors.
There's a question here that's asking, it is great to see the higher reduction in speeds reduced. Do you know if the speeding fine is higher for speeds exceeding 30 miles an hour versus 20? Interesting question. The speed limit, and it'd be nice to bring that up here, so I can show you what the variation is. But you can look up the bill. It's online. But there's not a difference in terms of what the speed limit is. The difference in the fine as it goes up is related to how much faster you are going than the speed limit. So there is a higher fine for higher speeding for vehicles that are exceeding the speed limit by a higher amount. So it's linked to your speeding activity and not to what the speed limit is of the road that you're driving on. But that's a really interesting question. Oh, I think you answered that one live. Okay, how is privacy concern issues? Sorry, I'm just kind of skimming through the questions here. So someone asked, do you have any analysis on the roadway context in which speed was reduced less? Any effect of surrounding land use, number of lanes, etc.? This is interesting analysis that we haven't looked into enough to provide you with any interesting results. we've looked into it in the context of things we could adjust for, things we could study easily, but there weren't dramatic differences that we observed in the built environmental land use that would explain the variations. So kind of inconclusive, but possible, an interesting area to dig into in more detail. So someone asked, Todd asked, how was the privacy concern issue related to enforcement cameras addressed by the state legislature to get to the point that the pilot was allowed to move forward? I honestly, I don't think we're in a position to answer the internal policy discussions. It's an important one, and it clearly is an issue for implementing these types of policies, but I don't want to answer for the legislature. And then this final question is, in a world where you could implement, or if anyone else has other questions, please, in a world where you could implement any policy or infrastructure solution to reduce or eliminate speeding, and given speed cameras aren't significantly effective at 20 miles an hour, would implementing a citywide 20 mile per hour speed limit be a more cost-effective and absolutely effective solution? I'm not sure I completely understand the intent of the question there, and please feel free to clarify. I think from what we can see in the study, really what we can say is that the 20 mile an hour speed limit locations were not statistically significant in terms of the reduction. That doesn't mean that they didn't reduce speeding. It just means that we can't conclusively conclude with control locations, given the number of sites that were 20 miles an hour, if they were effective. So it's a bit of a nuanced answer, but the point is that a null result there doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means that statistically we couldn't show it worked. And that could be because there were fewer 20 mile an hour sites in the sample. It could be for a lot of different factors. So a little bit of, maybe perhaps like not satisfying answer, but just wanting to be real about what we can say with the data. Oh, you know what? So I'm sorry, Susan, I can keep going, but do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay, so Sang Cho asked, speaking of high surveillance, were there any studies reviewed in China as to the effectiveness of such devices, more effective or about the same? I don't know. It's a great question. I would also think of Singapore as a potential interesting place to look because of the cultural requirements that you follow the laws there. So that would be really interesting. We didn't look into a lot of the international examples, but that's a cool thing to look at.
Yeah, that's interesting comparative question. We didn't systematically review studies from China specifically, but
Yeah.
and we are open to that kind of comparison. So depending on some people's characteristics or any geographical characteristics, their drivers response very different, can be different. So that kind of comparison is really useful to improve this kind of speed management intervention effectively.
Yeah, and I think just kind of a final point maybe that we didn't make too much in the paper here or in the presentation is that the people who benefits from the speed camera program, it's not just limited to those on the road, right? It's also those who live in the communities where the cameras are installed. So when you reduce speeding activity, it's the pedestrians, it's the cyclists, as well as those in the vehicles who potentially benefit from reduced speeding incident, maybe even disproportionately benefit. We can't say that conclusively because we aren't looking at crash data yet, but it is an interesting question, of who benefits, and it's certainly those in the community will benefit as well as those behind the wheel. So it's something that's important to keep in mind for these locations.
All right, thank you both so much. That was super interesting. You have any final thoughts? If not, we'll let Nick close it out.
Great. Yeah. Thanks everybody for being here. Thank you, Dr. Raifman and Dr. Lee, for the research on this really exciting technology. Great to see that we've got a new tool in the tool belt here for improving safety, and especially for some of the most critical speeds for vulnerable road users. Thank you for the entire team at Berkeley SafeTREC for doing this work. And thank you everybody who tuned in. I'll just quickly plug, we've got a webinar coming up at the end of August, using simulation to evaluate driver blind zones. And that will be presented by the team at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And that's going to be August 26th. I think we should start advertising the next webinar soon. So we'd love to see you again next month. But thanks everybody again, and hope you have a good day.